Dear Representative MAKISHIMA, dear Ambassador LEPEL, dear ladies and gentlemen, good evening and good morning to our viewers joining from Europe. On behalf of the organizers, the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Japan, the German East Asiatic Society, OAG, and the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, a German political foundation and think tank supporting Japanese-German political and intellectual exchange since more than 50 years, I would like to welcome you to this panel discussion, Gender Inequality in Japan and Germany. In particular, I would like to extend a warm welcome to the panelists who have joined us here today in person and via Zoom, notwithstanding their tight schedules. It is an opportune time to discuss the topic of gender equality and inequality, not only because of recent news about statements by certain people. No, when we look at gender inequality, we look at a fundamental and structural problem that both the societies of Japan and Germany share. It is also obvious that the fault lines of discussions regarding gender equality in both countries show similarly great differences according to political orientation. Looking, for example, at the German and the Japanese parliament, it is quite clear that parties on what we call the progressive or left side of the political spectrum show far higher percentages of female representatives than parties on the conservative side. On the other hand, in some sectors of society, the political fault lines do not account too much. A few days ago, a Japanese newspaper compared female representation in trade unions and in industrial federations in Japan. The result was sobering. In both areas, the representation of women was close to zero. I'm extremely happy that we have panelists here tonight who can give us insights in all of these sectors: politics, the economy, and civil society, speaking based on their own professional and maybe even personal experiences. So thank you again, dear panelists, for joining us this evening. I look forward to your valuable insights and proposals regarding how to improve opportunities for equal participation in the societies of Japan and Germany and possibly elsewhere. In closing, let me thank today's technical staff and the simultaneous translators for making this panel discussion and the internet streaming possible. And with this, let me hand over to the chair of the panel, Dr. Jochen NEUMEYER. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor SAALER, and good evening. I'm Jochen NEUMEYER from the German Embassy, and I will be your moderator tonight. And I think we have a fabulous panel here, and I'm really happy to be moderating. And I think I would like to start. Oh, one more thing. We also have, of course, people watching us on YouTube and Twitter, and we have an interactive element. So people following us on our Twitter channel have the opportunity or can ask questions on Twitter. And my colleague, Miki Uchida, she will collect those questions, and later on, she will ask those questions to the panelists. So please feel encouraged. If you have questions, just type them on Twitter, and Miki will read them. Okay, so I start with the panelists, and I start with the one who is physically the most distant, but still has a great presence here on the screen behind me. She's one of the trailblazers for gender equality in Germany, and until last year, she was head of the agency which oversaw the German government's report on gender equality. So I'm very happy to welcome in Berlin Dr. Regina FREY.
Thank you for having me. Good evening to Tokyo.
On the right-hand side, seen from the audience, is a woman who used to be vice chair of Goldman Sachs Japan, but who became known to the wider public because she was the person who coined the term womenomics. And just yesterday, news broke that now she started a $150 million fund, which is focusing on investment with environmental, social, and governance value. So a very warm welcome to Kathy MATSUI.
Dankeschön. Schönen guten Morgen and konbanwa. Thank you for having me. My husband is German, so I speak a little bit of Deutsch.
On the opposite side, we have one of maybe the rising stars in Japanese politics. She has been a member of the House of Representatives since 2012, and last year she was appointed as director of the youth division of the LDP, becoming the first woman ever in that position. And one of her predecessors, for example, was former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So I'm sure we might hear a lot of her in the future, and I'm happy to welcome Karen MAKISHIMA.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm Karen MAKISHIMA. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much, all.
Thanks for having me. Directly to my left, I have one of the leading experts on gender issues on the academic level in Japan. She's specialized in labor economics, and she's a long-standing advisor to the Japanese government in several committees, so I feel very much honored to welcome Professor Machiko OSAWA. And directly to my right is the woman who started an online campaign after the president of the Tokyo Olympics Organizing Committee had made a sexist remark, basically saying that women talk too much. And under the hashtag Don't Be Silent, she started a campaign which gained more than 150,000 supporters and eventually helped to bring down the Tokyo Olympics chief Yoshihiro Mori. So please welcome the founder of the NPO No Youth, No Japan, Momoko NOJO.
Thank you for having me. よろしくお願いします。
Last not least, the German ambassador to Japan, and also the first woman ever to be in that position, Ina LEPEL. And, well, if you think it's a bit strange that I'm sort of interviewing my boss here, maybe you remember that Donald Trump, when he was president, he was interviewed by his own son, Donald Trump Jr., and I promise tonight won't be any more awkward than that.
Thank you. Good evening. Konbanwa.
So I would like to start with the political sphere. And in the House of Representatives, among 464 members, there are only 46 women, so it's below 10%. And in the ranking of the Interparliamentary Union, Japan ranks 166th of 188 countries. So, Makishima-sensei, when you first got elected into parliament in 2012, you were 35 years old. What did it feel like?
Thank you very much. It took about 4 years to be elected for the first time because I lost the first election in 2009. And I was struggling to get elected for many years. But for the supporters of my district, for them, it was their first time to work with the female candidate. So I think the supporters have struggled more than a candidate myself. But it took some time, but I could find many mentors, both male and female, in my district, and they gave us many chances to get to be in the part of the communities. And I came to know the female leaders in my communities, and I received many support from female leaders inside and outside of my district. But still, I should admit the number of the female political leaders in Japanese Diet is very small, and we see the very low rank of the gender gap. We feel the responsibility of political arena, and also we feel the responsibility of the LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, as the ruling party. That is the reality we face now.
But do you think in your parliamentary work, is it sometimes more difficult for you to be heard as a woman, or would you say that it doesn't make a difference? And what are your strategies to deal with that imbalance?
Once elected, I feel no differences in the LDP conversation or the discussion among LDP leaders, because I was elected with the many voters' voices. So I can stand by myself as a parliamentarian and as a representative of my district. So there are no differences between male LDP members of the House of Representatives or the female members. So I think how much support a female leader can receive is the key to be actively involved in the policy-making process as a politician. I think that's the basic concept as a parliamentarian. And last year, as you've mentioned, you've introduced, I was appointed as the first female director of the LDP Youth Division. I am the 51st director, and finally, LDP has decided to have the female leader of the Youth Division. And I think I should admit, I myself had a kind of unconscious bias, because the many young members of LDP parliamentarians wanted to be the director of the Youth Division, and we've seen only male directors. So I myself thought the 51st director will be male. So for me, it was a big surprise. But the senior members and my colleagues and other co-workers, colleagues in local assembly members from Hokkaido to Okinawa have admitted me as the director. And also we respect each other. So I might say we have a kind of gender gap in LDP or in parliamentarians, but my generation have no shocking or no surprise having the leader, have the director of the youth division.
Talking about that gender gap, there was a league of lawmakers working on a project which was aimed to enhance, promote women's participation. And in May last month, news broke that this league, which encompassed members of different parties, had given up on including a clause in a amendment bill which would have set numerical targets for female candidates on lists. And from what I've read here is that especially the LDP opposed the idea, and now I quote GG Press, citing the difficulty in replacing many incumbent male lawmakers with female candidates. So, were you happy about that decision?
Yes, LDP has decided it seems to be difficult for us to announce the numerical targets of the female politicians in the House of Representatives, House of Councillors. Especially many people watching the amendment bill very carefully, because we are going to have the general election maybe this fall. the reality is we do not have enough vacant seats for the candidates, for the new candidates. So that is the reality. So we've decided not to mention the numbers of the targets this time. But when we see the positive examples in House of Councillors, for example, the medical associations or pharmacist associations have 2 candidate seats for the proportion seats of the House of Councillors. And when they have 2 seats, they give 1 seat for male and 1 seat for female candidate. So I think the House of Councillors have more opportunities and possibilities to have female candidates.
But in the House of Representatives, do I understand that in a way that would mean that women would have to wait till a seat becomes vacant? There would be the idea that a woman simply could challenge the incumbent candidate and try to win that candidature, that would be a non-starter within the LDP.
It seems to be difficult for newly coming candidates, both in male and female, to challenge the incumbents in many countries and in many ways. But we, LDP, have the kind of private school for a campaign, a women's campaign school in LDP. And many people, many female leaders want to be the students of the Women's Campaign School at LDP. So now we are getting more female candidates pool. So we can choose from the pool of the female candidates to be the challengers for the vacant seats. Or sometimes the incumbent members has suddenly decided to resign. So if we have the pool of the female candidates, that would be better for them to challenge.
I understand. So from the sphere of politics, we turn to the sphere of economy and finance. And well, Kathy Matsui, you've been, well, as I mentioned, you invented the term womenomics, and I read in 1999 you came up with that idea the first time, and I read in brochure from Goldman Sachs that back then your argument was not social or cultural, but rather an economic one, saying there are 3 determinants of economic growth: labor, capital, productivity, and given that Japan has a shrinking population, it would economically make sense to bring in women. And in 2019, you had another report after 20 years, and you wrote like that closing the gender employment gap could lift Japan's GDP by 10%, and if you had you called a blue sky scenario, where the ratio of female and male working hours would be like OECD average, it could boost the GDP by 15%. Now last year, the Japanese government decided that the goal for women in leading position, which was set 30% by 2020, was sort of unrealistic, and so they simply postponed it by 10 years. Somehow it seems like the Japanese government didn't really heed your advice, or how comes that that even though apparently they were convinced by the idea, they could not realize it?
So I'll make a couple of comments in reaction to that. First of all, it is, of course, a disappointment that the government decided to postpone reaching that target But frankly speaking, I think any of us on stage and people listening who are familiar with the state of gender inequality in this country, we're not totally surprised, right? We all knew that we were quite far in government, in private sector, from a 30% goal. Having said that, what I actually told one of the cabinet ministers during one COVID webinar, I can't remember when it was, last year, was that it would have been more helpful, you know, it's one thing to postpone the goal, but maybe analyzing why you didn't reach the goal in the first place, and then coming up with a clear roadmap of how we're going to get to 30% the next time would have been more helpful for everybody to understand in society. So what should we be aiming for, you know, in the near term? Right? My second comment, though, is, you know, when you say leadership, I think we have to understand and appreciate the fact that while it has, you know, compared to 1999 when Japan's female labor participation rate was one of the lowest in the OECD, around 56% of all women who could work in Japan were working outside the home. That, particularly under the Abe administration, it shot up to 2019, 71%, which, by the way, surpassed my country, the United States, and the EU average, and which is very shocking, right? More women working here in Japan than in America and Europe. However, the quantity is higher, but the quality has not changed enough. So we still have a lot of Japanese women, of course many by choice, but some not by choice, working part-time. And we think about leadership positions in the private sector, in the public sphere, it is pretty difficult or challenging to become a leader in your sector if you're only working part-time, male or female, right? So to me, we've gone one step in the right direction by getting more women to work outside the home. That's great. But now how do we groom them or encourage them to work more full-time? And I published a book last year because I was, you know, not traveling with COVID, so I had a lot of time. And that book was aimed at, frankly, less the government, because I've written so much about what the government should do in my 30-year career, but more targeted to employers. Because at the end of the day, you know, I worked in finance for 3 decades. Yes, the government can make, you know, tax policy more friendly or change immigration laws. There's a lot of things the government can do. But there's also a huge onus of responsibility, right, on employers. So what are companies, what are public organizations doing inside their organizations to groom, to nurture, to motivate their female talent? That, to me, is the missing link. So I'm not saying don't blame the government. Part of the responsibility is the government with policy changes, but there's also a big responsibility on us, particularly in the private sector and the public sector, so you get this female talent into your door, how are you managing them? How are you encouraging them? So that's why I think it's no point to just point the finger of blame at the government saying, see, you can't reach this target. And like I said, I think, you know, please respectfully, I would like to see a roadmap, a little bit more clear roadmap, and I've actually advocated quotas in the parliament. I'm on record for saying that. But I think when it comes to the nitty-gritty micro level, for women to want to become managers and want to become leaders, we have a lot more work to be done at that organizational level. And that's unfortunately an area where the government cannot intervene, right?
We'll come to the concrete steps which can be taken by the government and also by the private sector later. But first I'd like to mention the World Economic Forum Gender Gap Ranking, which is not the only ranking, but one which has been quoted a lot. And so for this year, Japan ranked 120th and Germany was ranking 11. And I mean, that seems like like worlds apart. But I'd like to know if that really reflects the situation of women in everyday life. Professor Osawa, what do you think? I can hear you, but...
Thank you. This better?
Yeah, that's
okay.
better.
Yeah. The Cassie's talk was very interesting, and well, just your question about the 120 as the lowest among the advanced countries, it reflects the reality in Japan. I think yes, the women face so many difficulties and discrimination in educational level. For instance, at a public high school, there is a quota system, and the best high school has a quota, so that the 2/3 of this best high school accept male, and 1/3 female. So if you compare the score of the female male, that the female score is 200 points higher, which meaning that the women are restricted into the best level public high school, for instance, and the medical school examination, they take the test and then also interview the candidates, and they can adjust the score, and the male candidates can get better score. And this is all informal, not be disclosed. So layers and layers of discrimination against women. This is the beginning at the educational level. And then the employment level, usually the large corporation has a two-tier employment system. And one is managerial level, the other one is non-managerial post, and has a different probability of promotion. And women in the managerial position, 80% of men were chosen that post, and then the clerical, non-managerial post, 80% of women are choosing. Is this the voluntary choice? And the asking the question, why you don't choose the managerial post? And many people say that you have to work overtime, you have to work long distance office sometimes, and so all these conditions makes it difficult for women to choose managerial position. And then so what I'm saying is that any layers level, government, business, working, and the labor unions working together to protect the core labor market, which is mostly shared by men. And this system has not been changed. Can you ask me? Did I make it clear?
No, I'm just wondering. I mean,
Sorry. Yeah.
The second point. Yeah. The second point with the different career paths. It's, in a way, it's. It seems to be something that I've also read about, that women are mainly employed for this not so prosperous career path. Yeah. The first thing is about the high school quota. Actually, I've read about that case at medical schools, but it was, as far as I understood it, more a one-time thing, and it was. I mean, it was for quite a period of time, but when it finally surfaced, it was changed, and open discrimination when it comes to high school entry exams. Is that common practice, or
this is new things is coming out recently in a newspaper article, and they just compared the average score of male-female students passing this high-level high school, and it discovered that women has much higher score than men.
And
doesn't make sense,
And still not getting those places in those high schools accordingly?
That sort of men are favored treated by rule. That's what I'm saying. And so those are the things that we take it for granted, but we can see sort of discriminatory practice. So this could be the reflection of the 120th, the lowest, the very big gender gap in Japan reflects the reality of Japanese discriminatory practicing. Yeah.
On the other hand, Germany ranking 11, does that reflect the reality in Germany? Are we doing so much better? Dr. Frey, what's your assessment?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the gender gap index of the World Economic Forum is a very abstract number. And if you look into the figures, you have a little bit of a different picture. And for example, the explanation why Germany is ranking, has a high rank, is that, for example, one of the indicators composing the index is years with a female head of state. And well, with Chancellor Angela Merkel, we have a quite good situation here, because she's been head of state for more than 15 years, and other indexes going into this. But for example, if we compare Germany with other European countries, we have a different picture. We have, for example, another index of the European Institute for Gender Equality, and in this index there are more domains that are counted, and it's a more sophisticated index in a way. And there, Germany, for example, is below average. So it really depends strongly on what you look at and what the measurements are. And I think you have to take to account that there are different indexes, and yes, Japan's index is in most of the indexes, also the global gender gap of UNDP is low, but still, if you have a closer look, it depends on the domain you really look at.
Apart from having a female chancellor, what would you say are our stronger points, and what would you say are the weak points in Germany?
Well, the strong point is, for example, education. You have a very good educational system, which and also a lot of female students and so on. But if you look at the life course, then and the employment markets, this is going down. And as somebody said, also in Germany, okay, you have a big enrollment rate in the labor force, but also the quality is low. You have a lot of women working in mini jobs or part-time. That's, I think, similar to Japan. And you also have high life expectancy, which is also one of the indices of the gender gap of the World Economic Forum. So this is kind of the strong side, so the overall situation of men and women. But when it comes to economic empowerment and economic participation, you have very low figures in Germany as well, and also the political participation, which is also counting in this index. Well, we have Angela Merkel as a role model, but still we don't have equal representation in the parliaments and the national parliament. The numbers have been going down and not up in the last or in the current legislative period. So you have an ambivalent picture, and well, I think if you really want to compare Japan and Germany, I think the political sphere, I think this is, well, there's the biggest division there.
Now, calling about economic participation and calling about quotas, last week the German government has agreed on a bill that prescribes a minimum of women on executive boards. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that and analyze what does it really mean, and does that really make the situation of working women better in some way?
Yeah, well, first of all, one has to say this is a regulation that applies to very few companies and very few women accordingly. We have a long history in Germany of, well, talking about numerical targets in the private sector, and it started in 2001 with a kind of voluntary agreement between the government and the private companies, which did not work at all. So then the government slowly took more steps and decided on a regulation where the private companies or part of the private companies could assess their own numerical targets. But this ended in a situation that almost 3/4 of the companies where this regulation applied to, they did not give themselves targets or a zero target. So, well, the least ambitious target you can ever have. So when it came to this situation, now the government has said, okay, we really have to enforce things here, and because it's not really changing the game. The law was evaluated, and from the results of the evaluation, this new law now passed, saying that you have minimum representation. So if you have to have a minimum number of 1 woman with 3 board members, which is also does only apply to about 70 companies, and it's not a strict regulation. And well, it is contested in Germany as well, and also, well, the interference of the state into the private sector is something that is very much debated in Germany. But as we have seen, and also the colleagues pointed this out, I think there is a change of attitude with the private companies. Now it's going on that it's really a waste of talents to not include women. And I think there are some good examples that now also private companies are really starting to do more about diversity.
So you think it can have it can serve as a signal also to women in general, and not just giving 70 women a well-paid job on the executive board. Well, I'd like to turn to maybe the perspective also of the younger generation. And Ms. NOJO, you started the campaign Don't Be Silent, which really was a great success. And maybe would you describe what made you start it? When did you get the idea that you should do something about this sort of sexist remarks, that you should do something about the way women are seen in Japanese society?
Thank you. I'd like to speak in Japanese, so if you'd like to hear my speaking in English, please put this. Okay. So, 私が
Now, in February this year, when the former chairman of the Japanese Olympic Organization Committee, when I heard his statement, I thought that once again a cliche type of statement made by a male person. It was most unfortunate. And even today, you do find these kind of statements. I was surprised. But then when I heard the press conference the next day, when Chairman Mori, he was supposed to apologize. That was an apology press conference. But when I listened to what he was saying, he didn't really understand where the problem lies because people were making noise. He just wanted to say sorry, and that's it. That you are not punished, you're not penalized. That is not the problem in Japan. That is the reason why we are so lagging behind when it comes to the gender equality, the indices. I thought that this is a big problem. The society in Japan needs to change. That is something I thought that I need to advocate on. And why did I think that I should raise the voice myself? That is because I don't think that I am a representative of my generation, but looking at the younger generation, from the education, they have been educated on gender equality. So whenever some sexist statements are made, everyone in my generation will become angry. You shouldn't take it for granted. And gender equality is not something to be realized sometime in the future. That is not the case. Our generation would always contend that in my generation, we need to see the gender equality to happen because I don't want my sons and daughters to suffer anymore. So I thought that I should raise my voice because of that. So Mr. Mori, who was the chairman of the JOC, he was at the top position, and I was so afraid of raising my voice. But it is not that I belong to any company. I am not at a high position myself. I thought that it would not be a problem if I'm bashed or criticized.
So the reactions you got more than 150,000 supporters. Did you only get positive reactions, or did you also face criticism? And we all know that the internet can sometimes be a really rough and hostile place.
Most of the reaction were supportive, and not just from young women, but from different generations, and not only women, but also from men. The reaction was quite supportive in many cases, and that is the reason why I had the signature of more than 150,000. But on the other hand, when it comes to tweets or the social media, there were some criticism. Yes, there were many critical comments, sometimes slanders and bashing, sometimes. Sorry, her voice is no longer heard by the interpreter. The voice is cut off. There were sometimes the pornographic type of comments because I was a young woman, but I thought that I should ignore those comments.
Thank you. From your perspective, what do you think has to change in Japanese society? For example, I mean, Professor OSAWA, she told us about discrimination in the education system. Is that something you experienced yourself as well? And do you think, what do you think should be done about giving better perspectives to women of your generation?
Thank you. いろいろやらなければいけない。
I believe there are many things I need to do, but the one thing I strongly feel is the Japanese society is where the older generation male are staying on at the top positions. It does not change that quickly. For example, looking at the politics, you are more than 60 years old or even 70 years old when you become a prime minister. So the people in their 40s and 50s, there are wonderful politicians like Ms. Makishima, but going to the top position, it takes a very long time. There lies the problem, I believe. That is because gender equality if you compare yourselves to 100 years ago or 50 years ago, it was not really a focus of attention. So gradually, Japan is changing, but when it comes to the youth, the younger generation, at schools we learn that we need to be equal. Men and women need to be equal. And we need to have a system whereby those type of people will very quickly get to the top. That you need to wait until your seat is open to you. Then I don't think even my generation cannot really realize and achieve gender equality. While I am still alive, I very much want to see gender equality to happen in this country. So I would like to have older generation to sometimes give up their privileges. Now, the people in their 20s, like ourselves, as compared to the older generation, we have more awareness and consciousness of gender equality. But when it comes to politics, the people in the city assembly, the representatives, and 2/3 are men, and 1/3 is women. So even in their 20s, the gender inequality exists. So perhaps at this level, we can make some change.
So this sounds more like the younger generation is getting impatient. So Makishima Sensei, maybe they don't want to wait until those seats get vacant. Maybe they want to have the seats a bit earlier. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I do have more open seats for local assemblies, and we're encouraging female community leaders or young leaders like Nojo-san to get involved in local assemblies. But there was one incident, event, how can I say? But one female local assembly member was requested to attend the plenary session 3 days after the birth of a child. Then we've decided we should have the amendment rule for the local assembly members to protect the bodies of mothers. So before the childbirth, they should have the 6-week maternity leave, and after delivering baby, they should have the 8-week maternity leave. And also male members of the local assemblies need to take the paternity leave or childcare leave. So we are encouraging them, the younger generations, to get into the local assembly or local political sphere more easier than before. That's what we are doing right now. So once the female community or young leader is elected as the local assembly member, they will get more chances to challenge to the national level political campaigns.
So that's the way where they still have to start. When it comes to role models, I would like to turn to Ambassador LEPEL, who started her career a while ago in the Federal Foreign Office at a time when it wasn't, at least on her career track, it was not normal to have women in those positions, and where maybe the representation of women was about the same as it is in Japan's parliament today. So, Ms. LEPEL, what was it like for you when you were entering the Foreign Service? Did you have any role models? Did you feel like you had enough support, or what helped you in your career in an environment which was at first maybe not so career friendly for women?
Thank you. Well, yes, when I started, we were a batch of 60 new diplomats or diplomat trainees, and we only had 15% of women, which was considered a record at the time, and people were quite happy. And already then there was political will to really enhance women's participation in diplomacy. And since you're talking about role models, At that time, the head of the human resources section for the first time in the Foreign Office's history was a woman. So that probably helped. Although I remember when I was sitting my selection panel, there was only one woman on that panel. And when I was supposed to give my little mock speech, she had just left. And I still said, ladies and gentlemen, and I felt so embarrassed because there were only gentlemen. But that has changed later. And actually, I must say that I felt that this interest in having more women in the Foreign Service has always been quite lively. And in our batch of trainees, we actually had a kind of cash box where people who made sexist remarks had to put 5 marks.
So it seems that inside of the Federal Foreign Office, you had a supportive atmosphere. When it came to your interactions outside, I mean, you've been posted to places like Pakistan, now Japan. Did you ever have the impression that as a woman you had to outperform in a way to make your voice heard, or was it somehow different for you representing as a woman than maybe for your male colleagues?
Honestly, I have to say I never had that impression. I feel that mostly, especially people who interact diplomatically, are very concerned about being seen to be sexist or not women-friendly. So, on the contrary, sometimes I had the impression that my interlocutors were trying extra hard. It's a slightly different story when it's not a really diplomatic interaction, but more with civil society, so to say. Of course, in Pakistan, there are tribal leaders who don't want to shake women's hands, not because they feel that something bad could happen to them, the men, but they feel it would be seen as not appropriate for a man to touch a woman with whom they're not related. So that is basically something I could live with very well. And the other issue was that if one was invited for a big party in a traditional house, they sometimes had separate rooms for men and women. And one had to be careful as a professional woman not to be led to the room with all the spouses. But one found ways around that as well.
Talking about role models and talking about making a career in a mainly male-dominated field. Kathy Matsui, I have to turn to you as well, because I think investment banking is traditionally also rather male-dominated. If you were to give advice to young female colleagues now, what would you say? What helped you in your career, and what would you tell them how they should pursue their career?
So immediate things that come to mind, number one is, well, let me start with the worst piece of advice I've ever been given. The worst piece of advice was, Kathy, just keep your head down and work hard. Anybody else been told this? And so when I was young and naive and I was working for a British bank before Goldman, I did just that. I'm going to be really good at my job and just keep my head down. The be good at your job is, of course, atarimae. You must be excellent at what you do. But the keep your head down was big mistake, right? You should never keep your head down. Well, you should keep your head down when you're looking at your work. But you should also always have your antenna open, watching for opportunities. And, I have to say, working for 30 years in finance, I will tell you, it doesn't matter what the nationality is, the age, the men are really good at that. Their antenna's always, they know what's coming, they know who's going to be promoted, they know who's going to leave, they know what opportunity is going to open up, because it's just natural for them. So I think we women need to be careful about, again, being mindful, keeping your antenna always up for those opportunities. Second, I was told by one of my colleagues, excellent, really good advice, which was create your own personal BOD, personal board of directors, 個人取締役会, which sounds kind of strange, but basically it's people you can consult with, you can have as sounding boards throughout your life, right? And of course, many of us have mentors at work or in your academic life, but those people, frankly, only know you like at work. They don't really know your holistic self, and so this was really good advice. Pick people in your lives who know your 360 you, right? Which means that these people are not afraid to give you straightforward feedback, honest advice, even if that means feedback you don't want to hear, right? The negative stuff.
But those should be rather people outside of the company?
It can be both. I've actually have people in my BOD who were inside my company who just was an amazing life coach, career coach. So you can include people like that. But oftentimes in a work relationship, it's kind of hard to give really direct, straightforward, honest feedback. And so when I became a young mother, I had no idea what to do with the baby. I had no clue and no help, no relatives nearby. So, what do you do when my son is just woken up with red spots all over his face and he has a huge fever? I thought he was going to die. So I asked one of my mommy friends, this is the symptoms, what should I do? And she calmed me down and said, this is a common, ailment for little children, and don't worry, just do this, and he'll be fine. And he was totally fine. But I was freaking out, Or when you come to a crossroads in your life, a very important decision, should I work for this company, or should I go to this university or that university? You need help, right? And all of us need help. So that was really good advice. And the last thing, is I think women, and I don't know why, but particularly here in Japan, there's this sort of obsession with work-life balance. That word has just permeated everything, right? Oh, we don't have enough work-life balance, and that's why women don't want to get promoted. And to me, that word balance is quite dangerous because I think that puts undue stress. We put undue stress on ourselves because when I came back from maternity leave after my first child, all I could think about is, okay, I have to have perfect balance. 1/3 perfect wife, 1/3 perfect mother, and 1/3 perfect career woman. Every day that must be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, right? Perfection. And I think a lot of women generally are very type A, perfectionists, and they feel they're downgraded if they're not. Forget the word balance is my advice. Use the term equilibrium. Work-life equilibrium. For men as well, because men also have, every day is different, every week is different. You may be 150% work on Monday, but maybe 60% on Tuesday, right? And your life goes through many different events, right? Predictable and unpredictable. So I've tended to adopt this philosophy, not work-life balance, but work-life equilibrium. And the day I did that, my stress level went way down. So
that's on the individual level. I think very valuable advice, maybe. But you also mentioned in the beginning that there are things that companies could do to create a better environment for women. If you like to maybe tell a few things about your ideas what the companies could do.
Sure. So I speak at a lot of Japanese corporations, and I think that, number one, if we really think about how is Japan's economy going to grow with a shrinking population, you must be able to attract and retain the best quality talent you can find. Because Japan doesn't have oil, Japan doesn't have other natural resources. All it really has is its people. And so as a company, if you want to be the employer of choice for Nojo-san's generation, everybody wants to hire her, right? She is going to have a lot of options, right? She is going to be very choosy about where she wants to work. And like she was alluding to earlier, This generation does not want to wait 30 years to become bucho, or frankly, a higher up in the parliament. That is yesterday. This generation, you know, it's the smartphone generation. You push a button and food gets delivered to you in 20 minutes. That's the generation. And so if you're not, you know, if you don't offer these opportunities based on performance and based on merit, as opposed to seniority and time, you're not going to attract the best talent, right? So my advice is, and I know it's hard for a lot of Japanese companies, to switch away from seniority, time-based evaluation to more performance and output-based. This will not only help women, this will help men, right? Who think they are much better than their boss, who's 20 years older than, but they drew the, you know, wrong ticket, and they have to wait, right? And I will say also, because at Goldman Sachs, 70% of my colleagues were millennial or Gen Z. The young men, you know, your generation, were asking me more questions about how to manage work and life than the women colleagues, shockingly, right? And I asked my colleagues in London and New York, do you get these questions, you know, from your young male colleagues? And they said, yeah. So I really think the values of this generation, particularly young men, the young Japanese men, are changing so rapidly. So if you're a company and you're not sensitive to this, again, you're going to lose the competition, right? So I think there's a lot of things, you know, of course, unconscious bias training, there's so many things that can be done, but at the end of the day, it's a war for talent. And you need to figure out, wherever you're working, why would, you know, Nojo-san pick your organization or your company, right? Because she's going to have a lot of options.
I mean, that's an interesting economic perspective. Also making the point that in the end, it's good for the company itself, and it's good for economy as a whole. For society and for the individual woman who maybe is not a high potential, but just a average performer, so to say. Are there things that society and the state should do to somehow create a better environment for them, Professor Osawa?
Agree. And it's very difficult to, I think we have been discussing, this is why we were participating in government committee and suggesting tax reform and providing more daycare center. I think it's a number of daycare centers been increasing a lot, but yet there's a discrimination against women who gave birth, and during COVID-19 pandemic, some of the women who are taking child care leave are waiting to come back. And she says, oh, you don't have to come back because the business is shrinking. And so it seems to be that the system, they have a program, but they still are not really sort of, you know, but still women are discriminated. Just expected that women will not perform 100% because she's taking care of baby, this sort of things. And so I think it just this sort of discrimination has to be allowed. we shouldn't allow this sort of things. But the labor unions are not really sort of helping. So I met lots of women having trouble, and then asking, why don't you talk to the labor union? And then they says like they don't do much about it. So I think the Cassie is right that the very top level, globally competitive corporations are much more sensitive about getting the best talent. And those are the companies doing well, and I think because of that, the profits increases. But there's so many small businesses, and those are the businesses still I think that even though the registration passed, and still so many women suffer from discrimination, dismissal during pandemic. So I think long way to go.
Looking at the situation in Germany, Dr. Frey, what would you say, which measures have proven successful and which should be implemented from your point of view, and are there maybe measures that didn't change anything for the situation of women and which you cannot recommend?
In Germany, I think there were some regulations and laws on parental leave. I think they changed quite a lot because the main idea is to have a more balanced and, well, a more partnership in raising kids and doing the unpaid care work. So when our government introduced a parental leave regulation, they gave an incentive for more partnership in this sphere, saying, okay, if both parents take the parental leave, you can enlarge this parental leave by 2 months, or not only 12 months, but 2 months. And the figures now, they're slowly increasing, that really more men are taking the parental leave as well. Most of the men are taking only the 2 months. That's the other side of the coin. But I think there is a change in attitude that, well, raising kids is not, well, just women's issue, and it's not something that only women should do, but, well, the partnership idea in care work. So this is also a leading goal for the government, and they did some of the regulations. I think what is always a very big factor for success is the knowledge on disparities. So what we have done in the last years, we have now 3 gender equality reports, really showing in detail where the gender imbalances are, where, for example, the unpaid care work that women do 1.5 times more than men unpaid, and this directly affects the employment work. We also have instruments and tools, for example, gender impact assessment of law. So does it serve for gender equality, for example, when it comes to tax law? So we do have a lot, and there's a recent development now in Germany. Just 2 days ago, the law was published on Foundation for Gender Equality in Germany, which will be a think tank on, well, not only the knowledge and the data and facts and statistics, but also be a kind of innovation hub and a network also with the civil society to promote gender equality. And in Germany, everybody's very curious on how this will work and whether it will promote gender equality in the society. We also have a gender strategy of the government. This is, well, not only on targets and, well, participation of women in different fields, but also there we have goals like, well, more partnership in parenthood. And also we have the issue of poverty of old age women and poverty of single mothers. And we there have the data, but not yet any good instruments, and I hope this will change. So on the structural side in Germany, a lot of things are being done now, and I think there's a lot of movement, but from the outcome, I think, well, there still has to be done a lot.
One recurring idea seems how to make it easier to combine having family, having kids, and still having a career. And Makishima Sensei, when you're trying to make the point for more gender equality or for political measures, which line of argument do you take to convince your peers in the LDP? Does it more sound like Kathy MATSUI, like saying it's better for the economy, we cannot afford to waste talent? Or is it more the perspective of Osawa Sensei saying we have to have measures to make everyday life better for the average woman?
Maybe both arguments are important in Japan, but when I tried to talk with the male leaders, we might use economical figures. That might be easier for them to understand the situation. And also we have many CEOs in the arena of femtechs. Like that, when more female employees are involved in commercial marketing or promotion, the companies will get better ideas or better items that the customers will love. So that is one of the examples of the economic impact when they have more female involvement in economical situation. And also we need to encourage more younger generation, female generations. And I think the political sphere or LDP should be the place that will attract more talented young generation, and they want. Otherwise, we might have talented younger generations to get into politics. So we should do more, and we should hard work to attract the talented, skilled people. That's
sorry, but I have to pass that question to Nojo-san. Does that attract you?
Important question.
正直に言う
To be very, very frank and candid with you, not just to do with the LDP, but be it the big companies as well. Up until now, women to be able to exercise our ability just like male. So the most talented the women were doing their best to be on par with a male, but that was the situation in my generation above me. But my generation wants to be happy. When I become a politician, I don't want to work 24 hours a day. Of course, gender equality is something I want, so people will still strive hard. But still, it is not that you are women or men. Nothing to do with that. The most important thing in your life is not to gain an honorable position or not to make money, but you want to be happy. You have different values so that you are able to be promoted. I don't think that is that attractive to my generation. That is too hard for me, for example.
So if you don't want to go into politics yourself, as it sounds like, if you could ask for, let's say, 2 or 3 measures which politics could take to improve the situation of your generation, what would you wish for?
そうですね。まず一つは
Well, one thing is the people to move over to make vacant seats for us. That is very necessary. Even if you would like to aspire to become a politician, you don't have to be old, but you have a family of generation of politicians, and if you're male, it's very easy to become a politician. But if a quota system is introduced in the first past the post system, if you have a vacant seat, for those women who are seriously thinking of a political track, they would very much like to have that. And overall, the women still think that child raising is their own job. So we need to change this notion.
So better support for women who raise children. It's an important point. I'm curious to hear what questions came up from our followers on Twitter, because as I said, we would like to integrate that element. So my colleague Miki Uchida, she collected some questions.
Yes, thank you very much. I will read our comments in Japanese, so if you want to hear, please put your yes in. ちょっとフォロワーさんからの There's a question from the follower. We have received some questions already on live streaming as well. One question, actually there are 4 similar questions. In Japan, still, concerning the roles and responsibility in the family, child raising and house work, there's a lot of discussion. There are many people who want to know about the situation in Germany. So in Germany, do many husbands also do chores inside the house? And how about do many men in Germany also help with child raising and such?
I didn't understand this question to me personally, but if I'm asked to, I mean, of course now here in Japan, let's say it's a bit more difficult being a diplomat and being dispatched and having your family moving with you. And I'm glad that my wife moved here with me and gave up her job in Germany. So actually here in Japan we are in a way forced to have a more traditional family model than we used to have in Germany. I mean, my wife was lucky enough to work part-time here, but of course it's not really equal. In Germany, actually, personally, I took 11 months of parental leave after our daughter was born. And I'm lucky enough that at least in the ministry, this nowadays is not a problem for men either. But maybe, Dr. Frey, you have some more general data, not just my example.
Yeah, thank you. Well, with your 11 months, you're really high above the average. The average of fathers for parental leave is 3 months, 0.7, and for mothers it's 14.5. So you have this disparity. Although, as I have told before, there is this huge incentive for both parents taking parental leave. And I think, as I also said before, we have this figure of, well, unpaid care work. And care work is everything. It's not only taking care of children, but, well, cooking, also voluntary work around the neighborhood and so on. And there we have a huge disparity, and women making 1.5 times more of this kind of work. So we have still a disparity, but things are changing very much, and the policy now is starting to, well, try to have something like the earner and carer models that well, every person, male or female, can really combine both in the course of life. Like, okay, I'm working maybe sometimes part-time, but then full-time again, and then I take care for the children for a certain amount of time. So this is a kind of new role model, which also was difficult now with the COVID crisis, because we didn't have a big, well, what said to be backlash, but the disparities were there and rose because children, there were nobody took care of the children, and then women again took over. So in Germany, it's like, okay, there's a theory of, well, a partnership and earner-carer model, but in practice, we are quite far away from this, although there are changes in really more, especially young men and fathers taking over care responsibilities at the moment.
Shima-sensei, sorry to pass over to you again, but I'd just like to know in that context, what do you think should the Japanese government do to make it easier to combine family work and having a career for both men and women?
We've just passed the new child care leave amendment bill, and based on this bill, especially we are encouraging men, but the men can get the child care twice, not only once. And the second amendment is the large companies which employees more than 1,000 should publish the acquisition status of child care leave. So they should open the number to the public. And the third one is the employers should confirm employees if they have the will to take the paternity leave or childcare leave. So these three elements will be added to the childcare leave system in Japan. So why we passed this bill is we have only 5% of paternity leave compared to 34% in Germany. And the biggest reasons for male hesitation is the lack of atmosphere of companies. So we've encouraged the employers or the large companies to manage the atmosphere or the air of the companies for them to approve the paternity leave especially.
So, Miki, you have more questions from our followers, maybe?
Yes. はい。ちょっとまた
No, this is slightly different from the past discussion. In Japan, there doesn't seem to be much understanding for women who choose to remain single. So how about your views and what is the situation in Germany?
Maybe Professor Osawa, is there...
I think that's the number of women not getting married even they reach age 50 or something will be increasing or something like that. I see the data, so maybe this is why maybe this question might come. And I think that those life decision is the individual choice, but the very difficult for women remain to be single because the social system is made based on couple with small children, the two children. So that's the, I think the question is the safety net or those who are single women, do they, are they discriminated or do they have enough social, the safety net to live for, after they retire or those kind of questions? And I think recently the research shows that the poverty rate is very high among single women because they cannot get full-time job, most of them, and so they cannot have a pension, they cannot have a medical insurance, but because the society expects that everybody were married, so those are the group neglected, and I think this is a very important issue that I think the Japanese society should pay more attention to single mom or those women who remain to be single. I think the safety net is not enough in Japan. So that's what I think. We should be talking more about it, in the future.
Maybe, I think the question also aimed at the comparison between Japan and Germany. So maybe one of the German participants, Ms. LEPEL?
Maybe briefly, I'm single and apart from family, of course, who was disappointed in terms of grandchildren, I didn't really face any pressure from society. I think it really doesn't compare to the situation in many other places. But I just read a commentary in a German newspaper today that we also have the discussion not so much about singles, but about people who choose not to have children, because these people have to pay a little more for their old age insurance, because they are not paying their fair share, so to say, in terms of having new payers of contributions to that system. And I think also because in terms of life income, children are just expensive, and if you don't have any, you have more life income than somebody who goes to all the trouble of having a family. So in that sense, yes, we also have that discussion, but I think the pressure doesn't compare.
So I think we can...
Sorry. Should I maybe a short addition? For example, in Germany, normally if you apply for a job, you don't give your marital status or your family status. It doesn't play any role, and it shouldn't. So, and I think that's an important point. And from the figures, 20% of the women do not have children in Germany. Thank you.
We can maybe take one more question from the audience.
ではあと一つだけお答えできるかもしれません。でこちらにいらっしゃる方でもいいですし、また視聴者の方でも結構です。
そのドイツは
Now, in Germany, I think more women are in the workplace, but is there an issue of declining birth rate as a result of that? And how about single mother? The difference between Japan and Germany on single motherhood, if you have any comments.
I think, Dr. Frey, that goes to you. You sort of answered it already, stating the 20% of women staying single, but do you think there's a correlation between the declining birth rate and women choosing not... I'm not sure if I really got the translation right, but
in Germany, you see higher rate of women working in the society, but how about the lower birth rate? Is there a correlation between the two? And also the difference between Germany and Japan when it comes to single mother and single mother's household.
Okay. I can try to answer this. I think any of the, high developed countries do have a low birth rate. There are reasons for this, because in a sense, in these countries, it's a kind of, economically speaking, it's a punishment to have children, and that's a big problem. And I think that's a big challenge for the society to change this. And the example is really the single mothers. I don't know the situation in Japan, but in Germany, single mothers, they do have a very high risk of poverty in old age. So this is one of the most vulnerable groups in Germany. Many of the single mothers rely on state benefits, and they're quite poor in average. And I think this is also a problem that should be addressed. And staying single, not being married, and single mothers, I think you should not conflate this, because these are two different issues. But that's a global trend, shrinking birth rates and development.
Thank you. So we have 2 more minutes, and there's one more question I'd like to ask the Japanese participants now, because as we've seen in the beginning, the Japanese government has postponed its goals for gender equality, those 30% by 10 years, 2030. Do you think it will be further postponed in 2030? And why do you think so? Kathy MATSUI.
I have no idea, but let me just say as a final comment, in addition to what I said earlier about I am hopeful that there will be accelerated change because of Nojo-san's generation, especially the young men who have different values than their fathers and grandfathers. But number two, as some of you may have heard in the media, I have just launched Japan's first ESG-focused venture capital fund. And I worked in finance for 3 decades, and as some of you may be familiar, environment, social governance, this is a tsunami that's taken over the world of capital allocation, of finance. And so if you are a Japanese company, and for instance, you don't have any women on your board today, I guarantee your shareholders will ask the question, why don't you have any women on your board? And this is not just Japanese companies, it's German companies, it's American companies. NASDAQ is going to require 2 diverse directors on a private company board in America, on a startup, if you want to go public. And so this is a global trend that cannot be stopped. And so I'm optimistic, I don't know exactly to answer your question, but I think directionally and the speed of change, I'm actually rather optimistic because we have younger generation who believe, like Nojo-san, that enough is enough. And number 2, that the capital markets, this is real economic and cost issue, that if you don't pay attention to these things, you will lose the battle in competition versus your competitors, you will face a higher cost of capital, you will lose shareholders. So this is real front and center, top of mind issue for any private sector company in the world today.
Thank you. Professor Osawa, anything? What's your estimation? Where do we stand in 2030?
I think this is a globally, I said before, the globally competitive corporations, I think will increase the board members, women in board members, but still Japan as a whole, very difficult target because I think that Japanese company has to have a pipeline of the female talents from the beginning, so it just need to accept more women in managerial position at the beginning, and there's still discrimination against women to be in this track. So I think that's in order to achieve this, that eliminate the discrimination against women at the beginning of the career development, which created the biggest wage gap in Japan. Yeah.
Nojo-san, I mean, for you in 2030, I mean, this is like a standard question from a job interview, where do you see yourself in 2030? But what's your idea? What will Japanese society look like then, and what would be your aspiration where you would be?
In the year 2030, I am 23 years old, so 2030 would be in my early 30s. So I hope that I will be more closer to the center of the society. I hope that I will be working more to the center of the society. And in my own generation, our feeling is that postponement is no longer viable. We cannot really wait anymore. So in the year 2030, 30%, that quota, it's not that high a number, I thought. But when I look at the reality, the people in their 50s, the women are working mostly part-time. I don't think they can be promoted. So the numbers right now is something that we have to accept. But the government's policy is not to be done sometime in the future. I hope that they would be more impatient and try to make it happen right now. The gender equality debate so far was only for those highly capable women who were doing their best. They're most stringent. They try to catch up with men. But that is not the ambition for us anymore, even for women and men even. That is no longer our dream or ambition. So when it comes to employment policy, to work 40 hours per week, on average, everybody will be able to have a happy life. We need to have a fair society, fair and just society, and gender equality is already there, achieved. That is the kind of society I would like to have.
So, Makishima-sensei, do you think you can make those wishes come true? Help to make those wishes come true? And we're 4 minutes over, so please a short answer.
Okay, I'll try to make your wishes come true, and I hope it's going to be the hope for the young generations of Japan or the other countries. So I feel the responsibility of politics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to all those panelists here tonight, and I think it was really a fascinating, interesting discussion. I learned a lot personally, and I hope the same applies to the audience here in the room and the audience on YouTube and Twitter. And I would also like to thank, of course, Professor SAALER from the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung and the OAG for organizing this event with us, and all the people in charge of the technical side of it, which is more important than ever in these times when we do hybrid formats, and of course my great colleagues from the German Embassy who without them this couldn't have been done either. So thank you so much and have a good night or a good day in Germany.